These are things we used to do every day, but we just don't anymore. When you think about skills that have been lost in the sands of time, you generally think of things that accomplished crazy feats, like the Egyptians building the pyramids, or the Romans having cement that set underwater before Jesus was born. And yet, almost every human skill that has been lost is so much more mundane, but it does highlight how much everyday life has changed. Even in, let's say, the last 50 or 60 years, things people did every day are now obsolete. Welcome, I am Nostalgic Nick with Do You Remember? And let's dust off 10 skills that boomers had that are now very useless. Driving stick shift. For those of you blessedly born after the 1980s, the concept of a standard transmission, colloquially known as a stick shift, it might be completely foreign to you. So let me explain. It's basically a system that forces a driver to manually select the gears by using a stick with their right hand and pushing a pedal or a clutch with their left foot. In other words, a much more complicated system than we have now, where, some cars literally drive for us.
And it feels totally safe.
Boomers, however, had this down to an art form, and it wasn't just about driving, it was a lifestyle. Every shift of the gears, it felt like a personal triumph, like you'd somehow harnessed the raw power of the engine itself. And let's not forget the high-stakes drama of starting on a hill, where the fear of rolling backward into the car behind you made even seasoned drivers sweat bullets. Parallel parking? Ha! That was kid stuff compared to the sheer terror of perfecting a smooth takeoff in traffic. But listen to any boomer talk these days, and they'll bemoan the youth who have forgotten the lost art of driving stick. And their reasoning pretty much boils down to, but car more fun when I make go vroom vroom. But still, I'll admit it, there's no denying that stick shifts taught a very unique kind of patience and precision. Qualities that, aren't too bad to have, even in the age of lane assist and autopilot. Plus, they gave boomers a built-in excuse for looking cool. What can I say? I've got 2 hands on the wheel and 1 foot on the clutch. No time for distractions. Some of the best manual transmission cars in our opinion were the Mazda MX-5, the Dodge Challenger, and of course, the gorgeous 1968 Ford Mustang GT. What about you? Did you have a car that was a manual transmission? What kind was it? At what age did you learn how to drive stick? Who taught you? Aren't those memories so precious? So if you know how to drive stick, then you certainly know how to click with a mouse, so hit that thumbs up icon to show us some support. And make sure you're subscribed so we can keep the past alive. Writing in cursive. Imagine being a 3rd grader in the 1960s, or 70s, or 80s, or 90s even. It's the first day of school. You can read and even write legibly. What else is there to learn? When suddenly, you're thrown into a world of loops and squiggles where every word is smashed together. Welcome to cursive, kids, the writing system whose main benefit was not having to take the quill off the parchment so the quill wouldn't break and the ink wouldn't dry out. And who can forget those little lined practice sheets from school? Endless rows of uppercase and lowercase letters, each demanding perfect loops and strokes like you were preparing for some secret scribe society. Honestly, it was a rite of passage, but also a rite of frustration. And yet there was something very elegant about it, a flowing script that made every word look a little fancier, even if you were just writing, "Dear Diary, math sucks." Well, into the 20th century, we used a writing system that Thomas Jefferson would have heartily approved of as being very cost-effective. And while cursive does add a touch of character and uniqueness to a letter, anyone who had to decipher a doctor's script in, say, 1956, certainly had their work cut out for them. All I'm saying is computers are pretty useful and orderly. Plus, let's be honest, cursive was also the ultimate in passive-aggressive communication, a poorly legible thank you for your generous gift. But in cursive, boy, that could speak volumes. Maybe it wasn't just a skill, maybe it was an art form. Also, how do kids nowadays figure out how to sign their autograph without learning this in 3rd grade? How can you even dream of playing center field for the Dodgers when you can't sign your autograph over and over during 2nd period? I really don't know. These are the questions that keep me up at night. Writing a letter. Speaking of cursive, how many kids today do you think have ever actually written a letter? because for boomers, they were one of the only ways to effectively communicate with friends and family that lived in other cities or states. But now with Skype, FaceTime, texting, email, Snapchat, BirdTube, okay, I made that one up. But seriously, there are so many ways nowadays to communicate instantly, oftentimes face-to-face via technology. So these days, no one takes the time to put pen to paper anymore, which really is a crying shame, because sitting down to put your words into ink made you really consider what to write, leading to a more heartfelt message. Hey, try telling that to all the kids who refused to outline their essays and just started rambling into the typewriter or the Word document. Plus, each letter you wrote and mailed cost money to send and took days or even weeks to reach its destination. Oh, and remember the anticipation on the other end, the joy of looking in the mailbox and seeing an envelope with your name on it. Like finding a mini treasure chest of untold wonders, and it's just for you. Of course, writing letters wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. You had to deal with stamps, which were easy to lose, and envelopes that never quite sealed right. Then there was the anxiety of waiting weeks for a reply that might start with "Dear John" and end with heartbreak. Still, there's a charm in it, a quiet intimacy that texts and emojis they just don't capture. Maybe it's time to bring it back, even if it's just to confuse the youth. So maybe this Christmas, give your kid a pen pal. And let's force these suckers to write a dang letter, because honestly, I don't think they would regret it. It is a charming part of the past, and I declare it needs a response. Reading a map. Traveling, car rides, was an absolute wild ride for boomers. You had to get from point A to point B all on your own, without the help of Google or MapQuest. So what did you do? Well, you broke out ye old atlas and you plotted your route. The night before a trip, you had to go back over your route and make sure you had all your dots connected, or else you're up the road without a paddle. And there really was an art or a skill to reading a map. You had to consult the key to figure out the scale so you could tell how far away your destination was. You had to be able to find the rest areas, the places where there might be a gas station, if there are any toll roads. You saw the natural barriers like mountains where they might slow you down. You avoided the city centers where traffic could snarl you. I mean, all of this was taken into consideration while you plotted out your journey. Maps weren't just tools, they were adventures in paper form. You'd unfold one the size of a dining room table, only to realize you were holding it upside down. And don't even get me started on trying to fold it back correctly, cause I never could. Family road trips often turned into impromptu geography lessons, with debates over whether you'd miss the turn 10 miles back. It really was a whole thing. Now, traveling is so much easier because of the internet, but a lot of the adventure has sure been lost from a time when you had to make your own way across the country. There's something nostalgic about the days when recalculating was just your dad, grumbling under his breath, "I swear it's right up here." Memorizing phone numbers. Before computers were ubiquitous in our society, the only way to know someone's phone number was to look it up in the phone book, which was super annoying, plus we didn't always carry a phone book. So how did boomers cope? Well, by using a significant portion of their brain power to memorize every phone number they could. Of course, your home phone number is so deeply ingrained it's almost like your name. But you would memorize your friends, your parents' work, your families, maybe even the pizza joint up the street. But guess what? We certainly don't need this skill anymore because each of us is walking around the planet with the universe's biggest phone book safely sequestered in our pocket. But let's not downplay the accomplishment. Memorizing numbers wasn't just practical, it was impressive. It was like having a Rolodex in your brain. And while we've traded that mental real estate for trivia about TV shows and batting average stats, there is a kind of nostalgia for the days when dialing a number actually meant something. At the very least, it made prank calling way more intentional. Finding a date in person. When kids these days complain about how hard dating is for them, I can't help but roll my old eyeballs in my head. Sure, the internet is a big, weird, creepy place, but there are literally dozens of apps whose sole purpose is to hook us up with our desired romantic partner. Tinder, Bumble, Farmers Only, and even Tall Friends are out there to make your dating life easier. Compare that to how boomers lived, where you had to find your dates in the wild, the world. Whether that was approaching someone in a bar, talking to that cute someone at church, or going out with your work friends, weird roommate's weirder brother, you were on your own. Your dating success often relied on your skills at finding a match yourself. It was the ultimate improv exercise. You had to gauge interest, make witty conversation, and pray you didn't come off like a creep. All without a profile picture to swipe on first. The upside, every date was a blind date, but the downside, every date was a blind date. Still, there was a certain charm in meeting someone organically, even if it did mean awkward pauses and bad pickup lines. But the pros totally outweigh the cons. We had to muster up the courage to ask people out face to face. Rejection was at best concealed in an incorrect phone number written on a napkin. But at worst, it was cackles and a booming absolutely not. We learned how to take chances, and most of all, we learned how to connect with people. Something that in the age of technology is getting a bit lost on the screened out relationship beginnings. Using a library card catalog. Imagine it's 1962, and you go to the local library to find a book on how to drive stick. Hey, that's a callback. Anywho, you're shy, and you don't want to talk to the librarian. How do you find your book? A simple question that actually has a fairly complicated answer. Which is, you would use the library card catalog, a system pioneered in the mid-1800s by a couple of nerds. Antonio Geniso Maria Panizzi and Charles Ammi Cutter, whose goals were threefold. A, to enable a person to find a book if you knew any of its author, title, subject, or date of publication. B, to show what the library has. And C, to assist in the choice of a book. It was basically hundreds and hundreds of cards in massive filing cabinets. The old-timers had to search through these meticulously organized drawers, squinting at tiny typewritten cards and flipping through them like they were trying to find the winning lottery ticket. Check out one of the early scenes in Ghostbusters for reference. It was tedious, but it worked. Now, with the internet, finding books is as easy as typing a title into Google. Still, there's a kind of tactile satisfaction missing. Nothing quite beats the feeling of thumbing through a card catalog, knowing you're on the verge of uncovering some hidden gem. And then starting your quest like you're looking for that special artifact in the Indiana Jones maze of collectibles. This again had benefits for our brains, as even looking for the book was a little brain exercise. Balancing a checkbook. If you ask a teenager today if they know how to balance a checkbook, the reply you're most likely to get is, "What's a checkbook?" Or they'll try to put it on their head, to balance it. But balancing a checkbook was a crucial skill for boomers to have if they wanted to be financially responsible adults. Which is kinda important for those of us who, moved out of our parents' house. Hey, I'll say that louder for the kids in the back or in the basement. Move out of your parents' house. In the days before you could look up how much money was in your savings account with the press of a button, or the simple reflection of your face, the only way to make sure you weren't living beyond your means was to keep meticulous track of every transaction in your checkbook. Every month you would tally up how much had left your account via checks and how much had come in, thus balancing the books and keeping up with how much money you actually had. It was part math class and part meditation, but let's not sugarcoat it. It could also be a nightmare. One missed transaction and you'd spend hours retracing your steps, convinced that the bank had it out for you. It was a mix of paranoia and pride, and those who mastered it wore their balanced books like a badge of honor. These days, the apps handle it for us. But boomers deserve props for making sure their finances didn't spiral into chaos the old school way. Now, of course, we could flip the script and ask a boomer what an NFT is, or cryptocurrency, and I'm sure you'd get similar befuddled responses. And yeah, I could explain Bitcoin to you right now, but we just don't have time. But I certainly know what it is, a bit. Using an analog camera. Another skill which the smartphone has effectively killed off, except for the artists among us, is using an analog camera. Now we just point our pocket computers at whatever pretty sight we see, and presto, we're Ansel Adams.
Adams was a skilled craftsman, a master at manipulating his equipment.
Gone are the days of finding the right aperture and shutter speed, of dropping off our film and praying the pictures come out okay, of sitting around with your friends and going through each shot, trying not to get fingerprints on them as you laugh about how terrible you all look. It wasn't just about taking pictures, it was an event. Sure, there were frustrations. Who among us hasn't lamented a roll of overexposed vacation photos or found a thumb covering half the shots? But there was magic too. You didn't just take a picture, you captured a moment. And then you had to wait for it to materialize, like some kind of photographic alchemy. Not to mention that analog cameras gave photos a warmth and texture that digital images often lack. You know, grainy imperfections that somehow made everything feel more authentic. Each shot was intentional, every frame a little gamble, and you couldn't go back and then reframe the shot. Smartphones are convenient, yes, but they've robbed us of that delightful anticipation and the sheer thrill of finding a shot that came out so perfectly, even if it took a whole roll or two to get it. Using a rotary phone. Show a rotary phone to a kid these days, and it's likely they won't even recognize the device as a phone at all, let alone know how to even begin to use it. Okay, that might be a bit of a stretch. The rotary phone is an emoji after all. I'm sure most kids would be like, old phone. And yes, that's right. But using one was a skill so ingrained in boomers that they didn't even have to think about it. But for those of you not familiar with a rotary phone, it was a phone where the numbers are arranged in a circle on a dial with a finger hole for each one. You would put your finger in the hole and rotate it, and the dial would slowly go back to the start. During this return rotation, an electrical switch interrupts the direct current of the telephone line the specific number of times associated with each digit. Thereby, it generates electrical pulses, which the telephone exchange decodes into each dial digit. Gosh, I'm boring myself. You get it, right? Because I think I do. But still, there is something quaint about the entire process. Each call felt deliberate, like you were physically willing it into existence. It's kind of like analog cameras. Rotary phones had a tactile charm you just don't get anymore. There was no speed dial or, "Hey Siri." Every digit had to be carefully chosen and dialed, giving you a moment to actually think about who you were calling and why. And don't forget the tension of dialing a long-distance number, hoping you didn't mess up on the 8th digit and had to start all over. It was communication, yes, but with a little extra drama and flair built in. And while maybe it's nice to not have to wait for a dial to spin back to you again, a small part of me misses the satisfying click-clack of a rotary phone in action. And there they are, folks, 10 skills that boomers had that are virtually useless today, for better and for a lot worse. So how many did you master as a kid? How many do you regret being lost? Which forgotten life skill going away do you think hurts the latest generation the most? Please get down in the comment section and tell us all your memories of these memories. Because after all, we here at Do You Remember are nothing without you. If you enjoyed walking down memory lane with us, please hit that thumbs up icon to show your support. Subscribe to the channel for more throwback videos. But most importantly, from all of us here at Do You Remember, thanks so much for watching, and thanks for accepting the charges for this call. Bye now.